Hello, my name is Daniel Fisher, Origination Manager at Abatable, and this is Developing Carbon Stories, a podcast about the project developers creating the most innovative and impactful carbon projects in the world. Developing Carbon Stories is a podcast by Abatable, an intelligence and procurement platform for the voluntary carbon market. In each episode, we speak with an entrepreneur from a different part of the carbon ecosystem and talk about their journey so far and how they are contributing to the fight against climate change. In Series 3 of the podcast, we're taking a focused look at the importance of nature-based solutions and their special ability to combat climate change while providing a host of additional co-benefits. In this episode, we speak with Marco Cerezo, CEO and founder of Guatemalan NGO FUNDAECO, and Karen Aguilar, FUNDAECO's Institutional Development Manager. FUNDAECO is a non-profit organization which has been working for 25 years to protect and conserve various biodiversity-rich rainforests in Guatemala. In our wide-ranging conversation, we discuss FUNDAECO's flagship REDD+ carbon project, the Conservation Coast. We find out how it works to stop deforestation and explore how Marco and Karen think carbon markets might change in the future after COP28. We hope you enjoy the episode. Hi guys, Marco, Karen. It's really great to have you here. I think I've been lucky enough to hear you guys speak before and met you, Marco, in person, Karen, unfortunately never quite in person yet. But yeah, I'm excited to have a chat with you guys, hear about what you're doing and your history, and I hope that we can allow other people to learn more about you guys as well. So, just as a way to start, I'd love to hear sort of an intro from both of you. Who you are, where you're from, what you do, and how you got here.
Karen, please.
Well, my name is Karen. I am Guatemalan and I've been working in conservation for almost 20 years. Right now, I'm the REDD+ manager for the Conservation Coast project, which is a very interesting task. Involves many protocols and systems. I'm not that lucky to be in the field. We have persons in the field that are in charge of project implementation. But right now, that is my task in FUNDAECO.
Hello. Well, thank you for the invitation. My name is Marco Cerezo. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of FUNDAECO. Well, actually, I'm an economist by training. I'm not a biologist, which is kind of unusual. But studying economics, development economics in particular, I realized how important natural resources were for poorer countries, for countries that were not yet developed, and how important it would be to conserve nature and to manage it sustainably. So I actually came into conservation through the door of economics. And of course, as a young kid, I used to travel a lot, camp out with my father. And I think that they taught me the love for nature very early on. So we're both, I think I speak on behalf of Karen and myself, we're both nature lovers, and above all, we are conservationists by heart, and that's why we're here in FUNDAECO.
Fascinating. And so, Marco, you touched on it a little bit there. That you went out into nature with your father, and of course, being I guess from Guatemala, you both have had nature around you all the time. But I'd love to hear what really got you interested in conservation. From I guess, was it from a young age or was it just at an older age? But yeah, I'd love to hear what properly got you into conservation, and then I guess where you are now.
Well, if I may, actually, very early on, after finishing college, I was in a conference about climate change by a NASA person. And they were telling us this is what the computers tell us that is going to happen. And I was 22, 23 at the time. And I said, oh my God, we have to do something about that, right? So I was a very young man when we started. I was in Rio in 1992. And we saw that momentum that was created by the international environmental treaties. And that's when I came back to Guatemala and said and proposed the creation of an NGO that would concentrate in conservation. So I think climate change was from the very early stages of FUNDAECO a concern. But of course, again, we were young, we were in love with nature, we loved nature in Guatemala. It's a very beautiful country. And again, we got together with other biologists, foresters, agronomists, and decided that we needed to do something about conservation and climate change in our country.
Amazing.
Well, in my case, I have to say, as Marco explained before, I think the family trips across the country made me to get in love with nature. As a kid, my parents took us to visit very far away places in the country. You know, usually people visit the beach, but our parents took us to the jungle, took us to the highlands, and that's how I learned about biodiversity in Guatemala. And then I think that my breaking point was in 1992. I went to an exhibition that was called La Agonía de la Selva, the jungle agony. And it was really dramatic. You know, there were pictures of forests in fires, pictures of dead animals. So it was very touching. And I remember that after that, I started reading um, local articles about nature, newspapers, and collecting them. And that was the same year that Marco was explaining that the Earth Summit occurred, and
Mhm.
that the Convention on Climate Change was created. So that's how I learned that year. I remember reading in the newspapers about climate change, and but that was my breaking point. Then I decided that I had to do something. I started to get involved in voluntary activities, environmental activities, and that's how I met Fundaeco, also by volunteering.
Well, thank you both for your parents to
Yeah.
getting to hear where you are now, because and we're going to come to it in a minute. But
That's
yeah,
why it's so important to take your kids into nature. You know, when parents take their kids into nature, they're teaching them and
mm,
they're teaching them the love for nature.
absolutely. Oh, it's so critical, so key. And so I think that takes us quite nicely, actually, into into the project, into the Conservation Coast project that you guys here work at, and you've mentioned it already, Karen, the Red Plus project. And so, really, what I would love to hear is from you what the project is. You're both incredibly passionate about biodiversity and nature and Guatemala, but to me, I've been lucky enough to come to sort of similar ecosystems around the world. But for a lot of people, I'm sitting here in London and across Europe, it's so far from us. Geographically, but also conceptually, we can't often think about what a rainforest might be like. And so I'd love to hear you guys maybe try and bring it to life for those who might be listening, who are listening, who haven't been to the rainforest or Guatemala.
Well, I would recommend going to Kew Garden if you live in London, and to read Alexander von Humboldt, and Russell Wallace, because they have beautiful texts about nature and tropical nature. But what I can tell you is Guatemala is part of the Central American Isthmus. So we're at a thin layer of land between North and South America, and the biodiversity in Central America is very rich because animals and plants from the Nearctic, from North America, started moving uh, across the isthmus, and plants and animals from the Amazons started moving north across the isthmus. So what we had was a bridge of life, and that's why here in Guatemala you find pine trees, but you also find pumas or toucans from that are Amazonic. You find pumas from the northern forest, and you have jaguars from the Amazon. So the enormous biodiversity of Central America is due to this role as a connecting landmass between North and South America. We call it the Central American or the Mesoamerican biological corridor. And the conservation coast, the area where we work, is right in the middle. So if these forests disappear, we're going to be losing, 5-8% of biodiversity of the planet because of the importance of this region globally, due to its role as a connecting area between North and South America.
And so This project is actually quite unique in that it's not just one large area, but it's a group project with lots of different land uses and landowners. I'd love to hear a bit more about how the project works. What are the building blocks that you had to put in place to make it a success, which I'm sure was incredibly hard work and took a long time. But I'd love to hear from you how that works.
Yeah, sure. So the project is located into a mosaic of land ownership. So this means that we need to work with many different type of landowners. The woman that has just half an hectare to maybe a company that owns 300 hectares. So what we do is that we have a structure where we work only with local technicians, people that understand the local dynamics, economics, and that have been there, living there maybe since they were born or since many years ago, that knows the communities, the families. And we are separated into 5 offices, I believe, and that are focused on working with these communities that have specific needs, specific relations to a certain ecosystem. Most of them are like mountains. So we have, for example, Sierra Caral, which is in the border with Honduras. That is one geographic area. So over there we have a social technician, we have environmental educator, we have agronomists, forest people that it's dedicated to the forest. So all these people is into the field really daily, talking with the people, understanding what are their needs, and building together the different project activities. This is very important. So when we designed the project, we look at that information that we have, which are the activities that will support us in getting our results. And there is another component that is very important, and I know that we will probably speak about that, but it's also the gender component of the project. And this is I think it's very unique for our project. And it's at the core of the project interventions.
So maybe I can add that when you talk about REDD+, you're talking about stopping or reducing deforestation. So in the tropics, we have a very complex socioeconomic dynamics. We have problems with deforestation because of cattle ranching. We have deforestation because of subsistence agriculture. We have agro-industrial plantations that are also taking down forests. So when you think about an avoided deforestation project, you have to think about all the activities that need to be done in order to stop deforestation. So the building blocks for any REDD+ project are those key activities that, if correctly implemented, will actually stop deforestation. So for instance, if poverty and subsistence agriculture are the main drivers of deforestation, as is the case in our region, then you need to tackle poverty. You need to provide environmental education. You need to support with scholarships primary education for children. You have to provide health, and of course, you have to provide alternative livelihood opportunities. If law enforcement is an issue that's pushing deforestation, then you have to design a protection and surveillance system to protect the forest and to strengthen law enforcement. So I think that the main building blocks of this project are responding to what we call the drivers of deforestation, and they're trying to tackle poverty. They're trying to tackle, the lack of opportunities in the community in the project region. But we're also, of course, doing law enforcement. We are doing policy lobbying. We are doing governance at the regional level, so as to support the law enforcement at the regional level. So our project has different building blocks that tackle the drivers of deforestation. And I think that's very important to understand because it's not one single activity, and deforestation is a complex problem that needs to be addressed from multiple fronts.
And I would add that one of the blocks is the voluntary participation of the people. All the forests that are included into the project have been voluntarily included by their owners. So we explained it to them what the project was about, what was carbon, what are emission reductions, and they had to decide if they wanted to commit, to avoid deforestation, or if they were the ones that would deforest, if they were willing to not to do that, and also what they could do, if instead of deforesting, or how could they engage with the community to stop deforestation. So it's voluntary participation, not only from the forest owners, but for all the other activities, environmental education, forest protection. We do forest protection, forest patrols with communities that are willing to participate voluntarily and that are walking daily into the forest just to detect if there is a threat for the forest. So it's voluntarily and it's a collective action.
It's really interesting to hear, and I think it's so important to hear this, from developers like yourself. I think all too often in the voluntary carbon market, especially, people who are maybe buying, or investors or corporates, they think of REDD+, and then they think, REDD+, one shoe fits all. All projects are about the same. You put a fence around a project and stop trees being cut down, but it's so different from that. And as you very nicely put, each driver of deforestation is completely unique all across the world. And if you don't address that very specific, unique driver in that specific, unique region, then the project will not work. And I think that's a testament to how successful you guys have been, in that, you've been able to really address these direct drivers and actually work super hard to make sure that, the people working voluntarily often are actually better off for it. And you sort of touched on it already, Karen, and sort of the gender component of the project, and the community engagement, healthcare is such a core aspect of the Conservation Coast project. And I think this is incredibly important, and I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, so when you imagine the Conservation Coast project, and I think many REDD projects, there are communities living within the forest, and these communities are really far away from our all basic services. Sometimes, women need to walk 4 hours to the nearest hospital, and they would die of bleeding after giving birth. So, or you have these communities that only have a small school for elementary school, but they don't have access to a high school, or we are not talking about university, that's too far away from them. So as Marco was saying, if we get into what are the causes of deforestation, and we see that lack of opportunities is one of them, and we need to tackle that, to stop deforestation and to increase and improve community development in those areas. So after looking at how education and health were an important need for these communities and a gap for these communities, we developed an approach that it's most of all dedicated and focused to women and girls, because in our countries, if there is poverty, women are more poor. If there is lack of education and lack to access to education and services, are women and girls that are suffering it most. So that is why we have that special focus on girl and women. And what we are trying to do is we are providing these services, bringing them into the communities, particularly health, we have community health facilities that we call the community clinics that are also providing the services with cultural focus, in their language. So this is, a humanity thing, like to attend these needs in the local language. And we are also giving scholarships to the girls so they can finish elementary school. And if they need to go away from their communities to finish high school, they will have the opportunity to do so. And another important aspect, which is not evident maybe in conservation projects, is that as part of the health program, we do provide access to family planning. These families are not aware that family planning exists. Women are not aware that they have the right to plan their families. And once you discuss with them the benefits of family planning, because it's like that in urban or rural communities. If you have a certain amount of family income and you need to divide it into 5 people, you need to divide it into 10 people, your economics are affected. So we discuss with them the advantages of family planning, how can they access that, and they voluntarily agree to do so. So that's very important, because if we get to provide access to human rights, women rights, access to health, then what you have is girls that will finish their school and that will look for another opportunity and not only depend on the land, which is very important. I think we will speak about that later. But when you are located in an ecosystem that it's not suited for agriculture, then you need to look for other livelihoods opportunities. And that is we are trying to change between the local communities, and it's not that they don't want to, it's that they lack of those opportunities. So far communities are happy to receive that benefit from the project. The problem is that we have not been capable to go to all these communities. Imagine there are more than 200 communities across the project zone. So it's a lot of effort and a lot of resources.
It's so powerful to hear the sort of the unique and individual aspects that go into this project, and I think this specifically shines a light on just how important it is. And I think we can come to it in a minute. But some of the negative press around Red Plus project is it's missing the fact that these are not just ID numbers, right? These are real people, real lives that are being completely changed, all right, and and families' lives that are being changed. And I actually, we could have a whole podcast just on this aspect. But I would say you've got some incredible stories out on YouTube and some videos out on YouTube that I think we should link maybe to this podcast as well. And I'd encourage everyone to go and see these sort of individual success stories, really, and of how this conservation project is changing lives. Hello listeners, Daniel here. Just to let you know, we have included links in the description of this podcast to some YouTube videos that bring some of FUNDAECO's programs to life. Now back to the episode. And so I guess to move on a little bit, in that, we've already touched on how a project has to be unique and has to act upon the dynamic changes of its surroundings, be it the weather, be it government change, be it policy change, but also, we also found recently that nature can be quite cruel. COVID, came around without us really expecting it, right? And also we had some hurricanes. Well, you had hurricanes, sadly. I think it was amazing to see the response of you guys and the project and your organization to this region. And actually, can you tell me a little bit more about that response? Because it goes beyond what people think of as a conservation project.
Well,
Ye-
I think that what we have to understand is that we are working in very isolated environments, in very isolated communities, and in many cases, we have very small governments in the third world, in Guatemala. So the government doesn't have the possibility to reach out and provide services in all these communities. So our project is providing livelihood opportunities, agroforestry technical assistance, support for reforestation, clinics, women clinics, a scholarship for girls. And in many occasions, the Red Plus Project technicians are the only persons from the outside world, so to speak, going into these communities. And during COVID, uh, and people suffered. You know, the roads were blocked, people, communities were closed, so people lost job opportunities. People lost businesses. Tourism disappeared in the area, so people were suffering. And then immediately in November of that year of 2020, we have two major hurricanes, of course, also linked to climate change, that impacted in all these communities and destroyed crops. So once again, Red Plus is usually not associated to emergency responses. But in this case, our Red Plus technicians we organized response teams, and we provided food aid for hundreds of families across the project region. We provided medicine, we're providing alcohol for and masks for COVID prevention. But basically, we provided for several, actually months in a row, we provided food aid to these isolated communities that were suffering both from COVID and from hurricanes. And I think this is very important because Red Plus is not only, and I would say not mainly, about protecting the forest, about guards, protecting the forest and doing patrols. That's a small component. But basically, what we have to do to save the forest is strengthen livelihoods, strengthen governance, strengthen community participation and organization, and support communities in their basic needs. So that was very exciting. Of course, it was sad to see what was happening, but the project was there to support the communities, and we are still there to support the communities. And this is something that's also very important. Red Plus provides continuity of interventions in a project region over at least 30 years. Most conservation projects will last 1 or 2 or 3 years. The funds will be very limited. The scope of activities will be very limited. And once the funds of the project are gone, people pull out, consultants disappear, and the project finishes. In this case, Red Plus provides a consistent support for livelihoods and forest conservation over 20 to 30 years in a region. And that actually helps lead that region and help those communities develop more sustainably, develop alternative livelihoods, and ultimately live in a more harmonious way with their forests. So I think that's also very, very important to keep in mind.
We sort of mentioned it earlier on, Karen, but land titles to communities, or land titles so that communities can actually access, government forestry initiatives, supporting the transition to sustainable agroforestry, and giving them that alternative source of income. Tell me about this. What are the difficulties? What are the successes? What are the challenges? But actually, ultimately, why is it so important?
Yeah, well, land titling is important from, again, a humanitarian point of view. Having land, it's a basic for the people in the rural areas where you depend most of all from the land. And secondly, it's also an historic debt that Guatemala has with the indigenous communities. And in this case, we are working with Quechua communities, Maya Quechua, which is an ethnic group. And so these communities have been asking for their land titling since many years ago. They have been living there for decades, and they cannot access many projects. They cannot access credit. They cannot access some basic services because they do not have a title. But most of all, they feel insecure. Imagine that you don't own the land, that you don't have anything that tells you live there. and that you are always with this idea that somebody will come and take you out. In that case, you are also feeling that you cannot engage into long-term projects, like forest protection, because why? If you can be kicked out tomorrow. So we have been working in land titling to fulfill all these elements, this need of dignity, this depth to the Kekchi community, this need of security, and the possibility of engaging into forest protection activities. And these have allowed us to support more than 1,000 people that were living without their titles, and that right now have the titles, and that right now can access, as I told you, credits. They can access incentives, and they can think about other type of economic activities now that they have the land. So I think this is a basic for us, that it's not very well understood internationally, because again, what has to do forest protection with land titling? Well, it's linked. It's because it's the people that live and that occupy the land that can make the change to avoid deforestation.
So the project has actually legalized and supported legal titling of over 10,000 hectares of community lands and indigenous lands and forests. And in the early stages of RED, they were saying, this project will displace communities. In this case, it's been the opposite. RED Plus has come in and supported land titling for forests and lands of communities. And this has, in turn, made them stronger partners for the project. So I think that this is very important. Land titling has been a very important activity within the project. And once people have their titles, they feel, as it says, more entitled to participate in the RED Plus project and to take better care of their forest. So I think that's very important.
And I would need to add that at the very beginning of RED, I don't think it's like that anymore. I hope it's not, but that was one of the, I would say, invented critics to RED Plus, that the projects would come and take out the titles and take away the titles and the ownership of the people. And what we can see with our project is that not only that is not happening, but that we are going beyond and supporting people to get their titles. And it's also important to clarify that the standards, all of the standards regarding carbon and regarding land, does not allow to take away the land. People need to participate voluntarily, and we have safeguards, international safeguards, to avoid that. So it's important to bring this information out, so to avoid this invented bad image regarding land and RED Plus.
Absolutely. And I think, that takes us quite nicely into sort of the carbon markets. We haven't really spoken about it a huge amount. But of course, you are involved in the voluntary carbon market and have been now for many years. And, it's been a wild ride, right, in the markets. The last 10 years have been up and they've been down. But I think from our perspective, it has been different from your perspective. So please, explain how did you first get into using carbon markets and using RED Plus and the VCM as a tool, and Marco, as an economist from a background, I think it's fascinating to hear your perspective on this, and then also how has that been, the highs and the lows, because there's no surprise it's been difficult for a lot of people in the market, right?
Well, actually, we have to put this in context. 20 years ago, and maybe still today in some places, the main funding for conservation came from small grants and medium-sized grants from philanthropy. FUNDAECO worked through small grants, and we still receive small grants and medium-sized grants for conservation. But the fact is that if we want to scale up conservation, if we want to tackle climate change, we have to go bigger. we have to save all the tropical forests that are still standing, because we will not be able to stop climate change if we don't stop deforestation in the neotropics. So the fact was that FUNDAECO was having a hard time scaling up just with small and medium-sized philanthropy donations. And Red Plus actually provided the first real financial mechanisms to scale up conservation across the region where we work in Caribbean Guatemala. So I think that this is very, very important. If we want to save forests, we need large-scale financial mechanisms. And the Red Plus, I've been working in conservation for 30 years, and for the first time in 30 years, I saw a financial mechanism that was working for conservation of biodiversity in the neotropics. Unfortunately, in many cases, we started reading critics in the international press against Red Plus, and I think it's because a lot of people are looking at Red Plus from developed countries looking south. What they don't realize is that in many, many regions in the neotropics, Red Plus is the only large-scale funding available for conservation at this point. And what all this criticism that happened over the last 2 years mainly did was basically lower the price of carbon credits. And this was unfortunate because, a corporate buyer of carbon credits says, well, if there's a polemic around Red Plus, I'll just not buy credits. It's not a problem for him. We talked to some buyers that had supported our project, and after this criticism, they responded, we have no appetite for Red Plus credits. So really, these criticisms hurt conservation in the tropics, because when the price of a carbon credit went from, let's say, $15 to $4, what that means is that we have less budget, a smaller budget, to hire nurses that are attending the clinics, to hire teachers that are doing education, to hire park guards that are patrolling the forest. So ultimately, all these criticisms basically hurt conservation efforts in the field. And we talked to some of these journalists. We tried to explain what we were doing. And I think that there is a very theoretical and a high level vision of the issue. And I think that this criticism didn't take into account what Red Plus was achieving in the field. And we were 2 years ago, a year ago, we were selling carbon credits at $12, $15. Now we have a hard time selling them between 5 and 6 or 7. And what that does is it diminishes the budget we have available for conservation, because we have a very strong benefit share mechanism. A lot of people think that, if we sell a carbon credit, that money is going to stay in the city, in the capital of Guatemala. The fact is that all this money is going to the field, and when prices are higher, we can transfer more funds direct to the direct beneficiaries of the project, which are the community forest owners, the community participants of the project. So it was very unfortunate. Of course, we have to keep on doing our job, but now we are doing it, and it's much more harder to get a decent price for carbon credits. And that's why carbon pricing is so important. And corporate investors in carbon credits should not seek to buy the cheapest possible credit. They should seek to buy the high quality credit that is supporting communities, that is driving, reducing deforestation, that is protecting high value species. So those credits, those good credits, deserve a decent price so that we can do our job in the field.
Absolutely. It's so important to hear this, I think, especially at the moment, because like you say, there's been quite a lot of criticism in the last sort of 18 months to 2 years. And, what it's done is, ironically, it's done the exact opposite of what those criticizing the projects really want. Nobody wants to see deforestation. Nobody wants to see us losing the fight on climate change. But actually, these articles and this criticism is doing just that, right? It's slowing down investments. It's stopping investments in many occasions, and it's turning people away from, stopping trees being cut down. But as we've also heard, so much already in the last sort of 45 minutes, that it's not just trees being cut down. It's animals, it's people,
Livelihoods.
it's families, it's livelihoods. Exactly. And I think it's that's what's missing from these critiques. And it's, sometimes they might not like the methodology, or they might not like the claims that are being used, but unfortunately, projects that are doing the work have to get sucked up in this whole criticism. So it's super hard to watch. And one thing we're trying to do in this series is shine a light a little bit on what is this criticism really doing to the projects. And I think you put it so nicely yourself just now. Actually, the impact it's having is huge, and actually it's incredibly damaging. And this
Yes,
is not.
and you know that philanthropy for conservation has been going down for many countries. We used to depend a lot on donations from governments from Europe, and particularly Northern Europe, and that cooperation has got down. So conservation efforts have suffered. There is not a public budget for conservation in Guatemala. I mean, conservation suffers from lack of funding everywhere in the world, but you can imagine that in Guatemala there is no public funding for conservation. Very, very small amounts of money for the National Protected Areas Agency. So we depend on this kind of financial mechanism. And I think that a lot of people are talking about these large international funds. And I don't know if I'm going to step on some toes here, but these huge funds, such a huge bureaucracy, so many caveats, etc., that funding is not getting to the field. We've been working with these funds, and a $25 million project, that was approved 5 years ago might bring $25,000 to FUNDAECO in its conservation efforts 5 years later. So we're not going to save forests through these multilateral funds the way they are designed and operating right now. And I think REDD Plus, from our experience, for 35 years of experience in conservation in the neotropics, is the single most important financial mechanism that we have had to protect forest and biodiversity in Guatemala over these years. So I think that if I had to say something to journalists, is come to the field, see what REDD Plus is achieving. I think that these discussions about methodology are, we call them luxury discussions, right? When you have to do a work, when you have to pay the salary of a nurse or a park guard, talking about the methodology seems like kind of abstract. So we would say adjust the methodologies, but don't kill the mechanism, because it's working in the field. And the other thing I would say to buyers and investors is REDD Plus has worked. It has been working. FUNDAECO is generating credits from only 55,000 hectares of forests. And this is very important because in Guatemala, you cannot include a forest in a REDD Plus project without the direct acquiescence of the owner or the community that manages the forest. So, but these 55,000 hectares of forest are generating funds to protect over 100,000 hectares of forests. So it's the opposite of what's being said in the press. Very few forests are generating credits, and FUNDAECO is using that money to protect twice the amount of forests across the Caribbean region of Guatemala. We are supporting 8 protected areas that don't have any public funding and that we are funding through the REDD Plus mechanism. So I think that I would say to buyers and investors, trust the mechanism, look for those good quality projects, look for community impacts, look for biodiversity impacts, and trust the mechanism because it has been working for the past years.
And I would like to add that it's sad, because these critics, if we see it from a broader perspective, are affecting a dialogue that has been difficult to build. The environmental movement have been trying to reach and to talk with the industries and the private sector, but we speak different languages. And I think markets have been a language that have full this gap that we had during years, and I know that markets maybe are something that this journalist doesn't like. I don't know exactly what happens, but anyways, it's a language that in which we are meeting with the industries and with the private sector, and I think it's respectable. We have methodologies, we have standards, and we have a mechanism in which everybody is winning. Industries are getting to avoid their emissions. We are getting to avoid deforestations, and communities are getting benefits. So I think these critics are destroying a dialogue that we took years to build. This mechanism was discussed during many COPs, and to have the voluntary markets, we have all these technicians and scientifics to build the methodologies, and to build a methodology that is trusted by the industries. So I think we need to look broader to think about the future, because we will need more of these mechanisms and of this type of dialogues. And if that is translated into market, it's okay. Why not?
Yeah.
Carbon sequestration is a service that forests are providing, and conserving that service, protecting that service is a very important job. For many years, when we worked in conservation, we felt we were doing a measly job that nobody valued, right? These are romantic guys that are out there in the forest, watching birds and trying to save the forest. Red Plus put a value on this service, an economic value on this service, because it does have an economic value. If we lose the forest, we lose all the environmental services they are providing. We lose the adaptation benefits of forests, etc. So Red Plus put a value in our job. It feels like conservation has a value to humanity, to markets, and to corporations. So I think that this is very important. And I think that we have to keep on, of course, perfecting the mechanism. As you say, nothing is perfect from the early stages. We have to perfect the mechanism. We have to strengthen methodologies needed. We have to strengthen oversight. We have to improve technologies. But we should not throw away the baby with the dirty water, as you guys say. We have to protect the single mechanism that has brought serious funding for conservation over the past years.
COP28 is just around the corner now. Somehow it's already been a year since COP27, and policy change and policy is on the end of everyone's tongue at the moment. Everyone's talking about it and how it will affect projects and how it will affect the voluntary carbon market. And I've got quite a hard question, but if you could see something come out of COP28 next month or the end of the year, what would it be? I know it's a very, very hard question in the time we have left, but what would you like to see from COP?
Well, first of all, we would like to see a strong endorsement for voluntary markets. I think they are playing a role, they are agile, and they are making things work. Secondly, I hope we see a full integration of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based adaptation to the climate change discussion. We will not stop climate change if we don't save the forests. We will not be able to adapt to climate change if we don't save the forests. So I think that our ideal result would be a full integration of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based adaptation into all the discussions about climate change in the COP. And we should see more funding aligned, both private and public, for this type of mechanism. I think that would be vital. And of course, we should also hope that countries at the country level support the full integration of voluntary markets to the national nested mechanism and to jurisdictional levels and to national legislation. If we have strong corresponding adjustment facilities, if we have strong support by governments, we can leverage market forces in support of conservation, instead of relying on occasional, smaller, and very uncertain sources of philanthropy money for conservation.
I know that we're coming up to the end of the time we have, and obviously, first of all, I want to say thank you so much. It's been fascinating for me, and I hope fascinating for everyone else. But I also just want to say, thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing and tirelessly doing and continue to keep doing. So it's
if I may, I just would like to add that when you buy a carbon credit from the conservation coast, you're not funding, scientists sitting in computers looking at satellite images. You are funding a nurse that's providing healthcare, that's walking 4 hours into the mountain to provide healthcare to women. You are funding a teacher that's providing environmental education to boys and girls. You are funding a scholarship for an indigenous girl to finish high school. You are, of course, funding naturalists and community biologists that are counting birds in their forests. So that's what you are supporting when you buy a carbon credit. And additionally, you get the benefit of the sequestration and the avoided emissions from protecting the neotropical forests in Latin America and in Africa and in Asia. So I think we have to keep these mechanisms going. And I hope that we have many, many more corporations supporting this very, very important mechanism.
Absolutely. Carbon credits truly are just the tip of the iceberg. Actually, it's the plethora of co-benefits that they allow. And you put it so nicely. And so I guess to end the conversation, I've asked the rest of our guests this, so it's only fair now. And, we look outside the window, we turn on the news, and actually sometimes it can feel a bit depressing. Climate change is here, of course, and ever present. But of course, everything every day, there's something that should give us hope. And, I want to hear from you guys is, what gives you guys the hope against fighting climate change and the hope to kind of keep doing the work that you're doing?
Well, this is the only planet that we have, at least with the science that we have right now. This is what we know, the only living planet. And it's like you will not let your house and your home to be destroyed, so I feel it's a commitment that come from the inside of the preservation sense that we have as humans, but also the fact and the opportunity of meeting these communities, of knowing that we can do better for them. That gives me optimism, to see when I see these kids. The other day, I was having a conversation with two of them, 10 years old, and they are part of the scholarship program, and they were explaining me what they have learned about girls' rights, about health, about respect between each other. And I was impressed, I don't remember that as a 10-year-old I could speak about respect and about my rights, about human rights. And I was very optimistic to think of this, of the people, the girls of the future, the boys of the future. And also, of course, biodiversity. When you have been lucky to visit these beautiful areas, no matter where, because every country have something special. But when you have been lucky to see, an animal that you cannot find anywhere else in the world, and that what you are doing is helping to preserve that animal and that population and that habitat, definitely, even when you are looking all that bad news and you are looking the destruction and the trends, it just makes you to keep going and to have that optimism to wake up every day and say, okay, what I'm doing will impact somebody somewhere.
Amazing.
I don't have anything to add to that. I fully endorse what has just been said.
Well, thank you very much, Karen, and that gives me hope as well, and inspiration to keep doing the work we're doing on the other side. So, yeah, thank you so much, and both, once again, truly thank you for the work you're doing, relentlessly and tirelessly to help this planet, like you say, Karen, the only one we have. And also, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating to hear from you.
Thank you.
Certainly, and keep us posted if we can help in any way.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you're interested in learning more about how you can support these projects, get in touch with us at hello@abatable.com or visit our website. where you can also explore our market intelligence products to help users better understand carbon markets. See you next time.